All right, let's get this show rolling. Greetings, everybody. Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you may be. We've got a pretty big group today from all around the country, East Coast, West Coast. So I hope you got a little bit of sleep last night. Welcome again. My name is Ed Claughton. I'll be one of your presenters today. And on the line with me is Kevin Vest. And Kevin and I both are from PRI. We're going to walk you through what I think is going to be a pretty informative program about dashboarding as it relates to NIBRS. And we're going to demonstrate to show you a NIBRS data dashboard towards the end of this presentation. So hopefully you read our bios. I really don't want to spend a lot of time talking about us. I'd like to just focus on the material. So, there we are. Our bios are on the screen, but we both come from law enforcement, and we both have law enforcement information management expertise going back at least a couple of decades. And we thank you all for being here today. So what are we going to talk about? Well, certainly we're going to talk about the accuracy of NIBRS data. We'll talk about improving the quality of police reports, and that's a central purpose of this tool that we're going to show you. This dashboard is a phenomenal tool for improving your accuracy and the quality of the information coming in from your police officers or deputies. And this tool is something that you can use not only to look at crime rates or the volume of crime in your city or county, but also the dashboard is a tool that will allow you to see which reports have mistakes in them, who wrote those reports, who approved those reports, and you will be able to track the error rate. And I'll talk about the error rate in more detail here in just a couple of minutes. But essentially, I'm sure many of you have already made the transition to NIBRS. If you have not, one of the key requirements of making the transition to NIBRS is certifying to your state agency, your state law enforcement agency who oversees your UCR program for the state, will require you to quote unquote certify for NIBRS when you make that switch. And part of that process is demonstrating to them that you have a less than 4% error rate, so like 3% or less error rate in your monthly crime stats that are NIBRS related. And so this is a great tool to help you achieve that. And it's also a great accountability tool and a great tool to monitor the quality of your information. Now, before you click play on the slide, let me explain what we're going to get into here in the next couple of minutes. So this is a video. It's only about a minute and a half out of the Los Angeles Police Department. And it's a quick news clip from the LA Times that they published showing some issues with crime stats at LAPD, specifically in the assault category. Now, I know I see some familiar names in the program today, and many of you have been to my or our NIBRS or crime stat training programs. Some of you might have seen this, and you probably heard me talk a lot about assaults. The number one crime category, the number one, bar none, that will have the most mistakes in your data, in your NIBRS reports, is the assault category. And the inability to correctly classify reports as either aggravated assault or simple assault. And I'll go a step further and tell you that the other classifications that you need to keep an eye out for are burglaries and your sexual assault category. Rapes versus fondlings, rapes versus, consensual sexual incidents and that kind of thing. I think those are really your top three categories to look at. We'll get into this a little bit further in just a few minutes. And then after this slide, I'm going to show you some headlines about the problem with crime stats around the country. So go ahead and click the play button, and I'll get back to you as soon as that's done. So every year when your department publishes its crime stats, or month, many of you are publishing now monthly. All right, let me, I see a couple of chats coming in. Some folks are having some technical issues. And if for some reason you do get kicked out, this session is going to be recorded and it will be available on our website starting tomorrow. So if you have those issues, don't worry. If you miss out, we will make it available on the website. So sorry about that. I'm not sure what's going on. I don't know what's causing that. So either every month or year, like in Florida, we publish our crime stats twice a year. But most states publish their stats every month. The media loves to look at that data. And when they get that information, they will assess it for accuracy. They'll make some judgment calls about your crime rates, and many agencies around the country have been accused of falsifying crime stats when the media discovers inaccuracies, right? If they find something is inaccurate, and many of these crime reporters do know UCR or NIBRS, there will be an automatic assumption that the agency is intentionally downgrading crimes. And as you see here on the screen, there's a number of headlines from different agencies around the country over the last few years. Milwaukee was a case that we worked on. It was an audit that PRI worked on. Wrong crime data highlights inconsistent statistics. Why the U.S. needs better crime reporting stats. LAPD crime stats. Albuquerque PD crime stats. Trenton police report horrendously inaccurate crime stats. And so the reason that these articles happen is because typically, in my experience, there are not mechanisms or processes in place at the agency to proactively uncover mistakes when they happen. And in fact, most of the agencies that we have dealt with are over reporting crime statistics by an average of 27%. Okay, that's huge. And if I always like to put myself in the shoes of the head honcho, the chief or the sheriff. And you think about it, you say, man, if crime is lower than what we are publishing, if crime is a lot less in my city or county than it really is, I would not be a happy camper. And I'm going to be on defense and having to fight the media or anybody else, my elected officials, on trying to prove that these were issues related to A, B, C, D, E, whatever those issues are. And I can tell you what those issues are. They are always a combination of software problems in the system in combination with human error and a failure in the agency to have a thorough quality control system or process in place, which I'll talk about in just a few minutes, or problems with the tables. This first bullet point here addresses this point. Okay, we're going to go through, I don't know, there's 5 or 6 bullet points, I think, on this slide. And these are questions to ask yourself, to ask your agency regarding, are your stats accurate? Are you doing these things? And the first one is a point that relates to what are called those tables, either statute tables or code tables. And essentially what they are is a spreadsheet I'm sure some of you are familiar with this. It's essentially kind of like a spreadsheet in the back end of the system, and it lists all of your state statutes and the corresponding code number that tells the system what NIBRS crime this should be. It's a 3-digit code. Now, I'm going to switch screens here and show you an example of something. I think you're going to find this kind of interesting. So bear with me one second while I flip over here. Okay, can you guys see a spreadsheet on the screen? Just let me know if you would. A couple of you in the chat box. Make sure that's showing up right on your end. Okay. So this is an actual, what we call a code table or a statute table. And anything that you see in red is a mistake. Hopefully the text is showing in those. I have a monitor in my office and I see the spreadsheet, but I don't see the text in the red boxes. I don't know if that's just me or text is showing. Okay, good. Thank you. You see like code, it says like 220 should be 120. You see where it says that? Okay, perfect. So I don't know why that's not showing here in the office. So anything in red, and by the way, just to give you an idea, every state has about, roughly speaking, about 4,000 to 6,000 different statutes. This is a Florida table. Well, this one goes all the way up to 7,600 different statutes. And all of those are either criminal or traffic statutes. And those that are criminal have to have this code right here, which is the NIBRS code associated with the corresponding statute that that crime represents. And anywhere you see red is a mistake. Let me show you, and this is from an actual project we did a couple of years ago. This is from a table from a big police department here in Florida. That's a client of ours. Now I want you to look what this says, right? What this says here. It says 220 should be 120. Now 220 is the code for vandalism. Okay, 120 is the code for robbery. So what we did, part of our contracted services for this project, was to go through the table and convert it to the NIBRS format. Well, the vendor had already done that for them. And when you transition to NIBRS, the vendor's either going to get the state table that the state publishes, or they're going to have their own table pre-built and provide it to you and say, no, we just have to update the system and implement this new table, and you'd be good to go. Every single table that we have worked with, every project we have worked with, those tables have been chock full of mistakes. Every single one. And so look at this. 220 is the code for vandalism. And the crime that they're associating that is a robbery carjacking. In fact, this whole section is the robbery statutes here in Florida. And all of those had been coded by the vendor as a 220 vandalism. Now imagine reporting all your robbery cases as vandalism. And if I were to flip through this entire sheet, I'll just go down a couple more lines. You'll see some additional examples in red. There's a whole bunch. I don't need to go through the whole thing. Let's look here. Okay, grand thefts being misreported. And if I were to get down to the assault category, that is the one that you really, really have to pay attention to. And I'm going to tell you why in just a couple of minutes. I'm going to circle back to that particular category. But this department was reporting all of their simple assaults as aggravated assaults. Okay, look at the murder category. Okay, here we have some miscoding in the murder classification. 09 should be 09. 09A should be either 09C or 09B or even a 13A, which is an ag assault. So something you definitely want to be aware of. And let me switch screens back here just a second. Hang on. So that's the first question to ask. Do you have somebody that is overseeing those tables? Because each year when your legislature makes changes to your state statutes, it's going to perhaps change the way the coding works in those tables. Do you have a system administrator that's staying on top of the system and its connectivity, its functionality, its accuracy, those tables, system settings, system configuration? Are you conducting regular audits of yourself, of your agency? Okay, do you have a thorough quality control process in place? I'm going to really focus on that in just a couple of minutes, but in order to be sure as an agency that you're doing things correctly Every agency should have a two-tiered review process in place. So many of you have heard me talk about this before. And that two-tiered review process in place, unfortunately, is not occurring and this is a bold statement, but I'm confident in saying over half of the agencies in the United States of America, police agencies, do not have a two-tiered review process in place. And just to put that in perspective, where do we stand to be able to say that as a company? We train this year alone. We have trained over 3,000 people that have come through our programs, and we have discussions with those people who attend our programs. And we do we contract with agencies who hire us to work on these kinds of projects. And time and time and time and time again, we see an approach where the model at the agency is such that they put the onus on reviewing and approving reports solely on a police supervisor, on a sergeant or a lieutenant. And it's not going to a second tier review as it should be to records, where records folks, and most police officers, by the way, they don't know this. Most cops are not trained in all the stuff that goes on behind the scenes in the world of records. They have no idea what their reports go through once they submit them. I mean, I didn't know. When I got promoted and assigned to the records unit myself as sergeant, I got in there and I was lost, as I couldn't believe all of this world of work that was going on. I had no idea about it. Most cops don't know that unless you work in those assignments. And so that second tier review serves two purposes. The records folks check every report, one, to catch what the sergeants might have missed, and two, to make sure that the report is in fact compliant with NIBRS. But many agencies don't do that. And they say, no, records, that's not your job to check reports or fix mistakes. That's for the sergeants to do. And that is an abject falsehood. It's an absolute failure. And so we absolutely preach as a company to our clients. You've got to understand that records folks, especially in the world of NIBRS, must be looking thoroughly at these reports. And then you have to ask yourself, how do the errors, when they're caught, how do they get fixed? What's your process in place today? Do you as an agency, per policy, authorize records personnel to fix certain mistakes? And if you don't, you absolutely should. Because as a matter of fact, that is central to the job of records, or your UCR unit or NIBRS unit. If you have like its own standalone unit, if you're one of these really big agencies, you might have a separate UCR reporting unit. But whoever it is, there needs to be policy in place that authorizes, by policy, allows those folks at that second level to make the mistakes that they can, which are not material to the case. I'm not right, and so we don't want other folks to change what the officer's writing in the narrative of a police report. But there's a lot of things that they can, and today, in fact, maybe already be doing right under your nose. You may not be aware of it. They're fixing things that are, in fact, related to NIBRS, but that needs to be in policy to show, if it ever comes up as a question in a court of law or by any third party, you need to be able to show as an agency some language that says something like this. All police reports produced by the Miami Police Department are considered a draft until final approved by the records unit through the quality control process. Bingo, done. And what you're showing to the public and what you're showing to the courts and to the media and to anybody else is that, hey, we don't consider our reports a final version until they're thoroughly checked at two different levels. And during that time, we're going to fix them. If there's mistakes, we're going to change those reports, as we should be, by the way. And so many police departments have this mindset. They're like, no. Once the report is written, you can't change it. That report is written by that officer. It can't be changed in any way, shape, or form. And that's hogwash, to put it bluntly. Any profession, I don't care what profession you're in, government, private sector, right? If you're in a business or in an agency, we produce either products or services or both. And it's incumbent upon that organization to make sure that what it produces is error-free. And we have to do so transparently. We have to do so by policy. We have to have an approval process and protocols in place, a process that shows, as it relates to us in law enforcement, right? For us, it's a process that shows these are the things that records personnel can fix. These are the things that must get kicked back to an officer, that can only be fixed by the authoring police officer, right? It's very important to have that in place. Next question asked is, are your supervisors held accountable for thoroughly checking reports? Okay. And are they getting turned in by the end of the shift? Think about this. For those of you that are in Florida, Florida agencies, as you know, in Florida, we only produce a UCR report twice a year, the mid-year and the end of year. And NIBRS is a monthly reporting system. Now, to be frank with you, I don't know. I have not confirmed yet with the FDLE. If any of you do know this answer, please chime in the chat box and let us know. But I have not personally confirmed or heard yet from FDLE if they're going to make a switch to the monthly reporting like the rest of the country is, or they're going to continue twice a year. But if it becomes a monthly reporting here in Florida and for everybody else, if you want your stats to be accurate month to month, they've got to be turned in on time. And you would be amazed at how many agencies we meet where they have this sort of unofficial standing policy. We give the officers to the end of their work week. We give the officers to the end of the work week to turn their stuff in. Really? Folks, the policy should be it must be in by the end of the shift, barring exceptional circumstances. Homicides, big cases, ongoing investigations, there are exceptions. But the standing rule should be we get them in by the end of the shift. The supervisors must check them and get them approved and into records, and so records can process them. And to the degree that you can achieve that, the more that you can achieve that, the more accurate your month-to-month data is. And so what accountability measures do you have in place for that? Have your officers ever been trained in NIBRS? You can't expect to report NIBRS correctly if your officers, the folks that are actually producing this data, because that's where it comes from, is their police reports, haven't received training. And the last but not least, right, the focus of this presentation is, do you track the accuracy of your reports? Okay. Do you have some mechanism for tracking what are called key performance indicators, KPIs? And in the world of records, there are two absolute must-have, must-do KPIs. And this too is another area that I see neglected, that many, if not most, police agencies do. They don't do these two KPIs, these two key performance indicators. If you're not familiar with the concept of KPIs, those are just it's a stat. It's stats, right? It's a sort of a monthly measure that is tracking something for productivity purposes, maybe, or for performance purposes, or for accuracy. And for us in records and in police work, the two KPIs are turnaround time and error rate. And the turnaround time is how long it's taking you as an agency to on average, put reports through that review and approval process, that quality control process, that two-tiered quality control process. So the turnaround time represents the time when the report is written by the officer all the way through the review process and it gets approved by records. It's final approved by the agency and can be released and used for whatever purposes. That's your turnaround time. And you can look on the news and you'll see, if you Google and hopefully they're not in this training today. I don't say this to pick on any, but just for giggles, these are good case studies, right? We're here to learn nonetheless. So go online at your leisure at some point and look at Seattle police records backlog, or Google Portland police records backlog, Portland traffic crash delays, or things of that nature, or anybody else. Those are two big ones that I'm aware of that I've been following over the last couple of years. Another one is Phoenix, Arizona. It takes, in Phoenix, if you go to ask for a police report, the average wait time to get a copy of your accident or your burglary report is 2 years. In Portland, it's 6 months. Okay. And so that's a problem. And that turnaround time is largely driven by the second KPI, by the error rate, right? Think about it. They're intertwined. They're kind of one and the same, because the higher your error rate is, means the more mistakes that are coming in your police reports, the longer it's going to take to process them and get them out the door. So if you have a high error rate, it's going to affect the timeliness and ability of the agency to review and approve those, because now you're having to reject reports back to the officer or the supervisor. And how many of you, and feel free to chat, I'd love to see your comments on this, how many of you get frustrated where you reject a report back to the officer and you wait and you wait and you wait and you wait and you wait, and it's days, if not a week or two, before they submit them back corrected to you. And that's a problem. So those are the two KPIs that are really important. We're focusing today, obviously, on the second one, which is your error rate. The error rate is calculated. Yeah. The error rate. Let me go back to the slide here. Just let's talk about that one for one more second. The error rate represents this. It is the number of mistakes in reports that are found by records that are found at the second level review process. In other words, it's a number of mistakes which the sergeants missed relative to the total number of reports written for the month. So simply put, let's say you have 100 reports come in for the month, and 50 of them have mistakes in them that the sergeants missed. Well, you've got a 50% error rate. Okay, and that's something that has to be tracked monthly. And when you submit to NIBRS, you have to have a less than 4% error rate. I see a couple of comments coming in. Yeah, Ashley's from a small department. Her kickback gets followed up by an email to the officer and the sergeant, and then she sends a teaser to get it back in, and it's fixed within a week. She said, "Yeah, a week's a little long, especially I didn't tell you this. Your turnaround time. Any ideas on what your turnaround time should be? What the industry target, the industry standard is? It should be 1 to 2 days. 1 to 2 days is the turnaround time. How many of you are gasping right now? How many of you are going, oh, no way, we could never do that? You can do it. You can do it. It just takes a lot of work to get there if you're way above that. It's a whole nother training course we can get into another time. So, and Maribel says she's glad that her department officers get stuff back within 24 hours. And that is a blessing. If you do that, if you're getting that within 24 hours, definitely a blessing. Amy's within 2 days. Excellent. Good for her. That's very good. If you're 2 days, that's actually excellent, Amy. It's really where you need to be. But unfortunately, I've seen so many that are like literally weeks. I mean, weeks, and that's not good for the customer. It's not good for the citizen. It's not good for the citizen. It's not for the victim who's already been victimized and needs a copy of their report to submit for insurance claims or whatever. So there's all kinds of reasons that we need those metrics to be very, very low. And we have another comment. It's interesting. She says, departments need to prioritize accurate staffing levels for records unit. Indeed. And the staffing levels impact appropriate reporting and adequate turnaround times to the public. Absolutely. Yeah. I know staffing is a challenge for sure. For sure. So that error rate is what we're going to focus on. And people always ask me, so what's considered an error? What's considered a mistake in a police report? Well, there's two types. The first one is an agency business rules kind of error. It's the business rules. What policies you have in place around report writing. Some examples might be, for example, I see agencies that make their officers get two bits of contact information. They always require, we want you to get at least 2 phone numbers, or a phone number in an email, or a phone number and a social media address, at least 2 ways to be able to contact the victim. Another business rule might be, or error might be, you didn't attach something to that report that was supposed to be submitted. You didn't submit a form with that report that you were supposed to submit, right? So whatever those agency policy related rules are. But the NIBRS errors are the big one, right? That's the second type of error. And basically a NIBRS error is anything that is related to NIBRS in any way, shape, or form. If that report is not compliant with the NIBRS rules, well, that's an error, and it could be a box that the officer didn't fill in that they should have filled in, and maybe it was a box that they left blank. Maybe it was a box when they made the wrong selection. They picked the wrong location type or the wrong weapon type. How many of you see where they forget to put a property value in there, right? They don't put a property value or a vehicle value. I mean, that's probably one of the most common issues there is. And the other thing I want you all to realize, this is really important as it relates to the dashboard that we're going to show you. And we've worked with just about every records management system out there, right? As a company, you name the vendor, You name those companies that produce these systems, we have worked with them. Just about, I'd say at least 80% of the systems that are out there. So each of these systems has their own take on NIBRS. And it's a database. Your records management system is a database. Usually they're SQL-based databases. And some of them are better when it comes to UCR reporting. Some of them are better at catching mistakes through that UCR or NIBRS error validation function. Some aren't so good. Either way, I have yet to see a system that catches all of the mistakes that it should when you press that button to check for NIBRS errors. There's not one system out there that catches all the mistakes. And that's what we have, one of the things that we have sought to address with our dashboard. Our dashboard goes beyond a step, goes beyond what the system is typically capable of catching. Kevin will address that in just a couple of minutes when I turn it over to him. And yes, Maria, so errors should be checked before submission to NIBRS. And so your system should have a button that you can press. You know, some of these systems call it the NIBRS validation button or NIBRS validation check or NIBRS error check. They have different names, but yes, it's a button you can press, and it will spit out a list to you of all the cases, the case numbers, and the kind of NIBRS mistake that's in those reports. But the problem is there's two problems with that. One, like I just mentioned, this system, I've never seen a system that catches all the mistakes that it should be catching. And number two, this is perhaps the more important reason. The second reason is a lot of the mistakes that can happen can never and will never be able to be caught by a software system. How many of you are familiar with the time and place rule? How many of you are familiar with the multiple offenders acting in concert rule? How many of you are familiar with the hotel motel rule? How many of you are familiar with the lesser included offenses rule or the mutually exclusive offenses rules? These are the kinds of mistakes. Okay, let me go back to time and place or multiple offender acting in concert rule. The software doesn't know what happened in that criminal incident. The software can't read. Yeah, I know you've heard me talk about this for sure. So I'm sorry to bore you with this again, Maribel, but I got to cover it anyways because it is important. So a lot of people have probably not heard this from me yet. So these are things that can only be caught with the human pair of eyes. Okay. Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Cassie says, until artificial intelligence can catch up with reading it, it takes a human pair of eyes to read those reports. And a lot of chiefs don't know this. A lot of people who get the sales pitch from the vendors say, "Oh, you just press this button, it'll catch all the UCR mistakes, and you're good to go." No, sorry, folks, that's not the way it goes. Don't ever be sold by a vendor telling you the system will catch everything, because a human can only catch the time and place rule. Should this have been one report or two reports? Were these offenders acting in concert? If they weren't to commit all these offenses, you got to write two reports. Okay, so it always takes a human pair of eyes. So what do we need to do to ensure accuracy in reports? Okay, you heard me allude to this just a couple of minutes ago, right? About supervisors who may just be hitting that approve button. You ever experience that frustration? You have some supervisors that just hit approve, and send those reports on through for review. On the other hand, we have some supervisors that are really, really diligent at their sticklers. They're sticklers and they check reports. And that's either due to the individual. You have a sergeant who's really good at his job and cares and checks reports thoroughly, or perhaps maybe they're really busy. Maybe it was a heavy call volume shift and they didn't have time to focus in a lot of detail on their reports, and they hit the approve button, a little bit faster than they normally would. These are interesting times we're living in. We've got a lot of civil unrest and a lot going on in our community. So, you may see a decrease in the quality of reviewing reports, but it's not to pick on anybody, but that's a fact of life. And the officers get frustrated by that as they move around from squad to squad, and they get different sergeants, rotated through over time. And they have some supervisors really good at checking reports, and others that just hit the approve button, and that can be frustrating to them when there's not consistency in the quality control process. And that's another benefit to having a dashboard in place. So accuracy requires preventing the mistakes from happening in the first place. And that's what we have to do as police departments. We have to work proactively. And when we as a company audit police agencies, when their stats are off, when their stats are inaccurate, every single time it's because they missed something. They didn't have proactive steps in place to catch these issues. And those steps include four items. There's four elements to ensuring accuracy. And that's auditing, it's reconciling, which many of you have heard me talk about that. I'll talk very briefly about that in just a minute. Reconciling. It's having a report writing manual, and it's tracking your error rate. So every police report has 6 pieces to it. Okay, 6 sections, 6 elements. The header information is your time, date, location, the case number, the type of offense, the basics, right? The basic what kind of crime it was. And then you have your person section. You're going to should always have at least one person listed in there who called the police. But then you have victims and witnesses and suspects and offenders and all of, yada, yada, yada. Property section, the report may or may not have property in it. You have your vehicle section. The case may or may not have vehicles involved. You have your narrative section. That describes the narrative. I believe the narrative is the most important part of the report, because it's what tells you, the narrative is what's telling you, the reader, what should be in all of the other sections. And then we have the case management. That's your status and disposition. So what is a mistake? These are what are called data elements. There's 52 different data elements in NIBRS. And that's a fancy word for boxes or fields, the fields within a report in your software system. These are all the boxes they have to fill in. Now, not all of them are going to be required. Depends on the type of cases it is. There's conditional fields and there's mandatory fields. Conditional or optional. Mandatory must be filled in if it's appropriate to that type of case that they're writing. And that's where the logic often fails with the software systems. So, for example, if the officer's writing a drug crime, some kind of narcotics offense, the system should absolutely force them to put in the drug type and the drug quantity, but sometimes the systems don't do that. Sometimes the systems don't flag the officer, and they don't say, hey, here's a red flashing light on their screen. You got to fill this in. You got to fill this in. Sometimes they don't do that. Sometimes the systems are just not very good at it. And then it leaves. That's why, again, another good reason why we have to have this 2-tiered review process in place. Here's the rest of that list. Okay, race, ethnicity, case number, type of arrest, type of crime, the arrest date, age, all the biographical information about our people, our victims and our suspects. There's all kinds of stuff that may contain mistakes, either because it was left out or the officer picked the wrong option. Let's do a couple of quick scenarios before we get to the demo and a couple more points. I know many of you have seen this, right? Some of you have been in my training recently, so you've seen this question. An officer goes to Walmart to a call regarding a stolen purse. The victim says her purse was in her shopping cart while she was loading her groceries into the backseat of her car. That purse, remember, the purse is in her shopping cart. Someone comes up behind her, grabs that purse out of that shopping cart, and runs away with her purse. What is the crime classification for this offense in NIBRS? How should this report be classified for NIBRS purposes? Let's see what the answers look like as they come in. Okay, very good. I see a lot of familiar names, so you guys are cheating because you've heard me say this before, some of you. Yeah, it's a theft other. It's a larceny other. One of the categories is theft purse snatching. And that may be the selection that people go with incorrectly. It's not theft purse snatching. It's theft other. The reason it's not purse snatching is because for it to be purse snatching, the purse has to be on the victim. They have to be in possession of that purse. An officer responds to Target regarding a report of a theft of a cell phone. The victim says she went into the changing room to try on a new dress. She's thrilled with the dress, and she goes to check out and pay for her dress at the cashier. 10 minutes have gone by. She goes, oh, I left my phone back in the changing room. Let me go run back and get the phone. She goes to the changing room, and that phone is gone. It's missing. Now, Question is, how would your agency classify this report? Most likely, just think about it. I'm not asking for right or wrong. The question is, think about the question. How would your officers likely classify this case? Ah, okay. Look at the comments coming in there, right? A lot of people. So I'm seeing two answers. You guys are pretty much split. Half of you are saying theft. Half of you are saying they would write it up as lost property, and that's true. Many officers would look at that as lost property, and they would say, you know, if they check the video, if they speak to any witnesses and that kind of thing, um, it's going to be lost property. If you know, maybe somebody turned it into lost and found or something like that. Well, let me make this very clear for you. In fact, I just about a couple of weeks ago got my hands on a recent FBI NIBRS training document from a state, and they talked about this exact scenario. And their rule essentially is the FBI says if somebody calls the police to report that property is missing, and it should not be missing, that's a theft. Absent proof, absent proof that it was just literally lost. When someone calls the police and says, "Hey, my phone was here and it was gone," they're calling the police to report a crime. So what the way the FBI looks at it is by nature of calling the police, what they're saying is the intent is that a crime occurred. And so that incident, okay, be clear on what I'm saying. Unless there's proof showing it's been lost and maybe turned in, it should be classified as a theft and theft from building. Theft from building. And the last quick scenario is the victim of a theft from a motor vehicle. Okay, so this is somebody whose car was entered. This victim comes out to her car in the morning. She's getting ready to go to work, and she sees the door to the car is ajar. And somebody overnight went into her car, into her unlocked car, and rummaged through the glove box, but didn't take anything. But she calls the police. She wants the police to know. The officer comes out to the scene. She says to that officer, "Hey, look, I'm in a hurry. I got to get to work, but I just wanted you guys to know that somebody came into my car last night. I don't really need a report, but calling the police to report this." How would your agencies handle that? I'm sorry, how would your officers most likely handle that? Okay, so notice some of the answers. We've got some folks that are indicating a non-criminal incident report or no report. And truth be told, a lot of CAD entry only. They'll just put it in CAD. Let me too be very, very clear on this. Okay. There's a comment. Terry said a really interesting comment, and I don't know if you've had NIBRS training yet, Terry, but let me address what she says. So Terry said no offense because car was open, and so here's a little bit of NIBRS training for you. Okay. The the question to ask in this incident was, and I want you guys to answer this and put yes or no in the chat. Did a crime happen here? Okay. The answer is unequivocally yes. Okay, I could frame the question another way. Is it illegal to go into somebody's car and look through it for stuff to steal? And the answer is yep, it sure is. That's a crime. And so, regardless if the point here is that even if the victim says, "I don't need a report," you better write a report. Because when you don't write a report and when you go by the victim's wishes, what you're doing as an agency is arbitrarily downgrading crime. The agency is arbitrarily deciding, "Nah, we're not going to document this crime because the victim said she's got to go to work." It doesn't work that way. And the many, many agencies that we have been hired to audit, and that includes Milwaukee and Nashville and Miami Gardens and Tallahassee and others who have faced a media storm of scrutiny for this exact kind of thing could have avoided it if they had good report writing procedures and proactive quality control processes in place. And so the NIBRS rule is you better write that as a crime because a crime happened. And to give you the answer, by the way, it's an attempted theft from motor vehicle. That's the NIBRS classification. Attempted theft from motor vehicle is how that report should be written up. Okay. So let's go through these 4 elements real quickly, and then we'll get to the dashboard. The first step of ensuring accuracy is auditing. If you're not doing self audits, I remember when I was in records, we made it a point every single month. We did a spot check. Okay, we literally like did a hand count. We'd run a query. We'd tell the system, give me all of the burglaries that happened in January 1 to January 30th. Give me, or 31st, whatever the month is. Tell me all the burglaries that happened. Tell me all the robberies that happened, and I would count those, and then I would compare those to the numbers in the UCR report. Okay, and they're not supposed to match, right? If you know NIBRS and how UCR works, not everything is going to necessarily get counted because of the way these systems work. That's a whole other training course. They're not going to match. But what you can do is spot the irregularities. And when you have these numbers that are way off base, right, you can dig further, and then you can start matching case to case to stat, and you can begin to find mistakes. Auditing is really, really important, folks. And not just the offense, the classification, but is the status correct? Did they close it out correctly? Cleared by arrest, cleared by exception, unfounded? Number 2, this is the second. This is the one many of you have heard me preach about this. This is the one I'm most passionate about. That's most frustrating to me. This is what's most frustrating to me as somebody who has worked with hundreds of agencies. And if I could get law enforcement to understand this concept of reconciling reports, they would be in good shape. And here's what I mean by this. That term reconcile is matching, aligning something, matching something, right? It's kind of a word like, at the end of the day, if you have a cash register in your business, you reconcile all the cash that's in the register with the receipts. Do the receipts match the cash that's in the register, right? We better have the right amount of money in here for the amount of sales that we made. Well, in NIBRS, we have to reconcile what happened in that crime with the way that it's going to get reported to NIBRS. What's in the narrative should reconcile with the NIBRS classification, the information that's in the person section, the property section, the vehicle section, and the case management section. Does what the officer wrote in that narrative align with the rest of the report? And then furthermore, is the system going to report this crime correctly according to the NIBRS requirements to the state? And what happens is really interesting. When you don't read the report through the lens of NIBRS, you will miss the mistakes. Think of aggravating factors, or what are often called criminal enhancer statutes. Again, I know some of you have heard this example, but it's a great example nonetheless. Still important. In many, many states, just about every state, I believe, I would confident in saying just about every state has these kind of statutes on the books, where when the victim is a certain type of person, it's a more serious crime, right? When your victim who is assaulted, when your victim who is beat up is a police officer or a pregnant female or an elderly person or some other kind of government official, there's typically a law in the state that says, hey, that's a more serious crime. That's a felony because she was pregnant, because he or she was a police officer. You can't do that, so now that's a more serious crime. Do you know that in every department that we have audited, we have found where the system, the records management system, is counting those incidents according to the way the law defines that incident, and NIBRS doesn't care about that stuff. When we audited the city of Tallahassee a year or so ago, they were reporting all of their simple assaults on pregnant females, and there were many, many, many. We did several years of auditing. There were hundreds. All of the scenario is this: you have a pregnant female who gets into a verbal dispute with her, boyfriend or husband, and it escalates a little bit to the point where she gets shoved. She's pushed, but there's zero injury. Zero injury to her, zero injury to the baby. It's such a minor incident. In Florida, as in most states, that is an aggravated battery. It's a major felony because she's pregnant, even if she didn't have injury. Right? It makes it a more serious crime. And that's how their system was reporting it, is reporting it as an aggravated assault. And they had no idea this was occurring right under their nose. And the reason it didn't happen is so the table that I showed you earlier had incorrectly coded those incidents, coupled with the fact that records had not been catching that stuff. And the reason they weren't catching is because they weren't reconciling. They weren't reading the report and saying, how should this be reported to NIBRS? Aggravated or simple? And so that concept of reconciling is applicable to every kind of crime, every kind of report that you read that's a NIBRS type of crime. We've got to ask ourselves, is this case on a case by case by case basis being scored and counted correctly to the NIBRS program? Question for you. Could you comply with NIBRS without having that NIBRS user manual right next to you at your desk? Could you do your job? If you are somebody in records or somebody who's responsible for reviewing and reports, do you think you could comply with NIBRS without that user book and get it right? Right? I mean, how often? And I've been teaching UCR since like roughly about 2004, so a long time. Okay, I still look at the book when I'm teaching those seminars. You guys are in my classes. I got that UCR book right next to me because I know someone in the class is going to throw me a curveball, and I'm not going to know the answer. And I'm here in my office, like flipping through the book, looking through the answer. I mean, you can't memorize everything. It's impossible. Well, neither can your officers. Neither can your officers. They can't write a report that's compliant with NIBRS with some kind of report writing guide. And the fourth point relates to the dashboard. The error rate represents, again, the percentage of mistakes and reports found by the records folks that were not caught by a police supervisor. And we need to measure that on a month-to-month basis. What is that error rate? Okay, is it high? Is it low? We need to get it down really below 4%. And it needs to track all the mistakes that can happen in all the different types of NIBRS offenses. Now, I'm sure most of you have some experience so far in NIBRS. What you're looking at here is a listing of all the crimes that are scored and counted for NIBRS purposes, and the crimes that are in red text are the ones that were not previously scored under UCR. So a lot of new stuff, all your drug crimes, your prostitution crimes, all your frauds, gambling, kidnapping. A lot more room for error. Pornography cases, stolen property possession offenses or dealing, weapon law violations. Right? And then you have your Group B stuff, which only gets counted when there is an arrest. About the dashboard. Yes, Michelle, I can make the slides available to you. Not sure if we put them in the course material. Just shoot me an email or give me your email, Michelle, and I'll send it to you. Okay, I'll send you the PDF. So yes, I'll send you a PDF and you can print out these slides. Okay. So what do we do? What is this dashboard thing we keep talking about? So the dashboard that we're going to show you is one that we built for another client, and understand it's not some proprietary, secret, super expensive software that's built from scratch. What we use to build the dashboard is an off-the-shelf open source software program that I'm sure many of you are familiar with called Microsoft Power BI. And Power BI is an analytics tool. And it's an off-the-shelf package that you use, you essentially customize it and connect it to your data from your system. So you basically plug the data that's in your records management system into Power BI, and it allows you to program a dashboard, which is, if you're not familiar with dashboards, is something that displays, like a dashboard on a car, some really neat, useful data. And because it's an off-the-shelf software, it means anybody can use it. Okay, so we're not building something super secret. It's anyone can use it. And using your data from your system in combination with our expertise and Kevin's expertise specifically as a developer, if you will, and our NIBRS expertise as a company, we're able to show you some really insightful, very useful data at your fingertips that can be used to help ensure compliance with NIBRS. It shows you where the mistakes are, what the mistakes are, who the officers that made the mistakes were, who the supervisors were that approved those reports, the case number, all kinds of interesting stuff. Yes, I see all your comments, and I will definitely email you. Wow, looks like a lot of you want these slides. Okay, no problem. I will. If I could get to it today, I will. I don't know if I'll be able to do it today, but at least by the end of tomorrow, I will. I'll have my office email you these slides. We'll get it out to you today. So Kevin, I'm going to turn this over to Kevin, and he's going to spend the next 10, 15 minutes or so showing you how a dashboard works, and then I will answer any questions after that. And then we should be done. So Kevin, let's see, I'm giving it over to you.
Thanks, Ed.
Yep.
Hello everybody. Let me share the correct screen here so you can see what Ed's been talking about. 1 second.
Yeah, I see the text here. I'll just send Leslie has a good point. I'll send you all the slides, everybody. Why don't I send them to everybody? Okay, so you don't have to worry about your email. I'll just put it. I have everybody's email. I'll just put it in. Okay, sorry about that.
So, if everybody can see a white screen with a header on it that says NIBRS error percentage of all cases, then I did that correctly. Okay, so we'll get started. So as Ed mentioned, we created this for a group of agencies that share one records management system. So what I've done is the way it's going to be deployed for them is each agency is only going to be able to see their data. But for the purpose of this demo, since some of those agencies are really small, I enabled all agencies. So what you'll be seeing is a collection of all agency data, just so that the graphs there's a little bit bigger sample size. So this is the first kind of the landing page for the dashboard. This shows the overall NIBRS error percentage of all cases for whichever month the user would like to look at. These agencies have requested to have a rolling year worth of data in the system. So just to show you how this works, they started their NIBRS certification here in September. So I'm going to jump back to March, and you'll see that their error rate jumps way up because obviously they weren't doing NIBRS back in March. So all the validation, NIBRS validation is not working for that because they weren't filling in those fields or those values that NIBRS wants or requires do not exist in those fields. So they're doing better as time goes on here. So as I mentioned, it is a rolling 12 months. The selection here controls the data that's displayed on the rest of the tabs. There's numerous tabs. So what I did is, since there is so many different crime categories in NIBRS versus UCR, I kind of grouped them into UCR-like sections so that there wouldn't be 52 or whatever that number is at different tabs on the bottom with one graph on each tab. So we'll go into persons crimes, and it's showing the same month. And then the dashboard concept is that it allows the user, whether that be a records manager, supervisor, or a police supervisor, manager, or executive, to digest information at a glance without having to, dig through tons of spreadsheets or a bunch of other information. So the concept of these different pie charts is that as the number of errors is resolved, there are no errors, then green is good and red is bad. So as the errors are resolved, the things turn green, and if there's still errors, it's red. So I've broken it down by crime category, as I mentioned. So for these different ones, agencies have apparently in the month of October 17 different intimidation type crimes, of which 6 have errors and 11 reports have no errors. So down here at the bottom, it shows different percentages based off of the error rate. And then over here, it shows the total number of errors. Now, I will admit that these totals are incorrect. This is showing for all the agencies, whereas these charts are showing for the original agency. I noticed that while Ed was doing the presentation that I did not sync the filters all the way through. So what you're going to be seeing is on the main page is all the agency data, but on these other tabs, this will show all agency data, and this is going to show the primary agency that I was working on. So my apologies for that. I noticed that during the presentation. That was not the plan. So persons crimes, as mentioned, this adjusts accordingly based off of the errors. Since this is connected directly to the agency RMS system and it refreshes on a set schedule, it is in essence real time associated with displaying real time the data in the RMS system. So if a records clerk is going in and making changes to an aggravated assault case, and then you come back to this dashboard later, that could very well be resolved and the aggravated assault would be all green. So we can go into property crimes, very similar, different categories, a bit more red based on the month, and again showing their totals. It also has the ability to drill through. So say for example, the user wanted more information on larceny, all others. They just select that item, right click, drill through, go to error by crime type, and it takes you to another tab and shows you all the cases and what the NIBRS error is associated with that case. So then we go back to, say for example, drug crimes. They're doing a bit better in the drug category. If a crime type, there are no crimes for that category, then the chart does not appear. So that's why that box is blank. Apparently, the drug abuse violations for the agency, as I mentioned earlier, there are none, so that's why that one is blank. Going into frauds, a bit more red. I will say that, for example, here embezzlement, there's only one case for this agency, so it is entirely red. Whereas with the credit card ATM, they have a total of 18 cases. So the charts are not on the same scale per se because they do the calculations based off the data that they have for that category. So it can be kind of, if you go to a tab and there's a lot of red, it could just be because there's, each category only has 1 or 2 cases and other ones have 25 or 50. So go over to miscellaneous, same kind of thing, different categories, different types of offenses. And then, as I mentioned before, there is the drill through feature. You can drill through and see what the different errors are by case. There's also an error total by crime type. So if you want to see how many errors there are by different crime type categories, NIBRS categories, there's a way to do that. These also can be printed, exported into Excel or other mechanisms, so you can store that data or use it to do advanced searches within your RMS system. This is the error total. This shows the cases and how many errors are on each report, who wrote the report, and then who approved the report. This was the request of the agency that we started this work. They wanted to be able to see the officer and the supervisor that approved it. I will admit that it is a bit problematic because since there is in this group a handful of agencies, and they are all not, even though they share an RMS, they are not all using the RMS in the same manner. So that's why there is some blank information as far as who has approved the report, etc., because some agencies are using it slightly different than others.
But that's not necessarily a bad thing.
No, that is correct.
Because there's a good example of hey, we just uncovered an issue through the dashboard, right? That not everybody is putting in this information that they should be. So it's kind of like a built-in check and balance. I see that as a positive. It's showing, and there's what I think there's 7 agencies in this consortium that we're working with, and so now they know, hey, we've got an issue with our workflow. So
That is correct. And then the error details, as I mentioned earlier, I showed you with the drill through. So that way, if you needed to look at a specific report, you could find out what the errors are for that report, and then work to address those errors uh, what's your normal process. One thing I'd like to add as far as the customization of what we've done with this agency is, as Ed mentioned, sometimes with the NIBRS crime uh, categories, a big one when I first created the dashboard was the cargo theft. Pretty much everything was flagging because there was no entry in the cargo theft box. So I was able to go through and narrow that down so that only actually reported when the actual crime type that that NIBRS item was uh, pertained to the crime type in fact. So that greatly reduced the number of errors, and we're still fine tuning that, not specifically that one, but that type of customization is possible to go in and make certain conditions apply so that errors either appear or do not appear based on uh, the set criteria. Their RMS vendor did not have that type of error checking capability, as Ed mentioned. Some of it gets a little bit complicated as far as which errors you want to appear based off of the crime category, the victim, etc. So that's what we've been able to do with that agency. A good example would be like if an officer is assaulted. Uh, I don't know of any agency that enters in all the officer information into the system, obviously, because you don't want their personal home address and other information in the system. So I did some uh, customization there so that I was able to identify if an officer was the victim, and so it did not throw an error because there were missing some of that other information that NIBRS wanted it to, that the NIBRS checking indicated should be present. Okay, let me flip back over and see if there's any questions. This, just to expand a little bit further, as Ed mentioned, this is created within Power BI. It does connect up to this agency's RMS system. If you were interested in it, it'd be the same type concept, just connected up to your RMS system. Uh, Hopefully with the acceptance of your RMS vendor, because I would need access to your database and also hopefully some database diagrams to be able to find all the necessary fields. But I can also, the dashboard can also display other information. If you have other data sources you'd like to have other information displayed with this, that also would be possible depending on what it is and how you wanted it displayed. I'm sure the question will come up as far as does it keep historical information? And the answer to that is no. So, for example, that list of officers and the errors by who approved what and what the error details were as far as the supervisors, that is real time. So once those errors are resolved, that those counts do decrease. So if your agency was interested in keeping some historical information as far as how many errors, the way you would accomplish that would be at the beginning of the month or whenever you wanted to run the dashboard, just go in and run this, print this off into Excel or dump it off into Excel. And then at the end of the month or after the NIBRS time period was over, basically do the same thing again, and you would have what the initial errors were and then what the final errors were. That's just the nature of the way, since it is connected real time to your RMS system. And once it's fixed in RMS, then it's no longer available for me to be able to display within the dashboard.
I wonder if they could get around that, Kevin, by running, checking the dashboard and then taking like a snapshot in time by exporting a report to a spreadsheet and just saving that spreadsheet, right? You could capture it in time that way.
Yep, that is correct. And also, I guess it could be possible. Different RMS design vendors may have different designs as far as they do a lot of logging as far as what was changed and who changed it and when. I guess it would be potentially possible to dive into their historical tables and see and retrieve that information, but that is not something that was within the scope of this initial project with this client group.
Very good. Well, unless you got anything else, Kevin, I'll take it back and we'll wrap it up.
Okay. I think oh, did I give it back to you or not? I think
I got it. There we go. Let's see, let me just press a button here. All right. So, yes. Yeah, that's Deborah, thing that I love about the dashboard is being able to see um, where the mistakes are coming from. You'll be able to show, hey, Officer Smith, you had 30 mistakes this month, or Sergeant Smith, you let a bunch of stuff through. It's a the kind of thing you can export to a spreadsheet, and you have that sort of inherent accountability tool with a dashboard like this. So in closing, I hope you found it informative. What if you want more information on it from us? It's a what we would provide is the service to build it for you. So if you want a quote or you want further information on the dashboard, just let us know. We can send you pricing, and what you're paying is for Kevin and I to build it for you. If you're interested, if you have internal expertise in Power BI and you've got the resources in IT to do it, it's something that you could do on your own. Um, but certainly we're available to help you with that if you want. And let me see if there's any other questions coming in, and then I'll cut you guys loose. Let's see. Is accountability? That'd be a nice thing to have, huh? All right. Any questions? Anything we can answer for you? Yes, it is pretty labor intensive. Angela, the expertise is the key thing, because you have to understand NIBRS inside and out, and you have to know the logic of NIBRS and how it, uh, what it considers to be a mistake. And so the developer has to know the different NIBRS tables in your system and know how to connect them and how to create the errors and that kind of thing. So it's the initial setup, and as Kevin's saying there, the initial setup and design is a little bit tricky. So the ongoing use of it is very easy. Anybody can use it. So thank you for your comments. I appreciate it. Let's see, I got a question came in. When you say we'd be paying for you guys to build it, does that mean you'd be literally building NIBRS into our RMS in-house? No, we wouldn't be building NIBRS into your system. Your NIBRS has to be NIBRS compliant for this to work. So your existing vendor for your RMS has to update and convert your system to NIBRS. And then once that's done is we come in and build this on top of your records management system once it's converted. So it's not, we can't make your system NIBRS compatible, if that's what you're asking. Question: do you know if our RMS usually charges for this also? I don't know. I mean, there may be some RMS vendors that have dashboarding built into it. That's definitely something you're going to ask your vendor. Your vendor might have a tool for this already, so that's probably a good idea to contact them and see if this is something they already have that you may want to get for them. And if they do, and if they're going to charge you for it, at least call us and compare pricing, right? Because they may charge you a lot more than we would charge you to build it. So just bear that in mind, because it's not all that expensive for us to come in and do it. It's really not that very expensive. Thank you. Appreciate the feedback.
Oh, Ed, real quick, one thing I wanted to add, I forgot to mention, was this is only, the dashboard is only read-only access to your RMS system. There is no means for users to make changes through the dashboard. It is simply a means to display the information from your RMS system, and if they'd like, export that out or print that out so they can then go into your RMS system and make whatever changes they need to make. So there is no, it's a one-way view-only type of application. There is no ability to write back to the database.
Very good. All right, someone asked about our training email address. If you have questions about our training, there's our training coordinator's email. It's training@policerecordsmanagement.com. Questions coming in. Do RMS systems charge to connect to the dashboard? Not. No, I don't believe so. Kevin, you may know. I don't think so. I don't think they're going to charge. If we were to come in, they're not going to charge you for us to come in and build this. That's typically not a charge.
Correct. It really would just come down to, does your IT staff have the ability to set up a read-only account that we can use to connect the dashboard up to your RMS system. If you do not have an IT section that does that type of level of database configuration, and you go to your vendor for that, then potentially there could be a charge there, but that's something we could discuss.
Very good. Well, you're welcome, everybody. Thanks for the great feedback. That's it for me. I hope you have a great day, and certainly we'll follow up with you or Christina from PRI. Christina is our Chief Growth Officer. She'll probably reach out to you if you want more information. We'll send you an email and can get you a quote. Thank you. Thank you for your feedback. Appreciate it. And stay safe, everybody. Have a wonderful day. Keep your heads up, and we'll see you at the next one. Cheers. Bye-bye.